It was my dream to work as a homicide cop.
Police are searching for a 6-foot-tall man with dark curly hair and badly stained teeth, dubbed the Nightstalker, who may have committed 13 murders and 12 grisly assaults in the San Gabriel and San Fernando Valley since February.
Just before pulling the trigger, the lights go out. Richard will tell me later he thought that he was in hell.
It's like the deviancy got even greater or more deranged. I mean, did he cut the eyes of one of the victims out in that?
We can only surmise, since there weren't any surviving witnesses or victims there, that he said, "Don't look at me or I'll cut your eyes out." And he's a man of his word.
Right.
He said he was going to do it, and he did.
Gil, the child abductions. I never really heard about the child abduction aspect to it, and that, to me, that's the scariest part, that he was going into houses and stealing, kidnapping children from their beds.
Why did he not kill these children?
The reason he killed people was, if you offered any resistance at all, you died. If you acquiesced to his commands, you survived. He was probably one of the better burglars that I've ever encountered, but he was good at his craft. And I just told him, unfortunate for you, we're good at our craft. You're going to go down.
Chief Mark Garrett, good morning.
Good morning, Bill. How are you?
Good. I'm super excited about today's show, Mark. We have with us a special guest, and I'm going to use the term legendary to describe him. And let me say why, Mark. When I know you and I, Mark, started our careers about the same time. For me, it was 92, coming to LA from the from the East Coast. And you growing up in LA, starting in 91 with Highway Patrol?
91 on the road. Went to the academy in 1990.
Yeah. So the Nightstalker case was still pretty fresh in everyone's mind then. And when I came to LA as a young DEA agent, I was actually sent straight to a drug task force where my supervisor was an LA County Sheriff Sergeant. I didn't even, he's the one that did my evaluations. You know, he did my performance evaluations, and I worked with a bunch of sheriffs. And once in a while, the Nightstalker case would come up, and the way they spoke about today's guest, it was with such reverence and such respect that, you know, as someone who looked up to these senior LA County investigators, you know, I'm a brand new DEA agent who knows nothing, and these are the guys that I'm looking up to, and they're speaking about today's guest with this next level of respect. You know, hey, he's obviously someone that I think very highly of. His name is Gil El Cucuy Carrillo, and let me tell you a little bit about him, Mark. He's an Army combat veteran from the Vietnam War. He worked for the Sheriff's Department for, I think, about 39 years. 28 years in Homicide, Gil, is that right?
26
years in Homicide.
Homicide, 38 on the department.
Yeah, that's an awful long time and a lot of experience. Probably seen, I don't know, thousands of murder scenes in that time, or at least close to it. Best known, Mark, as we mentioned, for, you know, his work and his partner Frank Salerno's work on the Nightstalker case, an infamous murder case in California and nationally that really Gil worked on in the 1985, you know, around 1985. By the way, my senior year in high school, Gil, not to make you feel old, I'm retired after a 32-year career, and that was my senior year in high school. But you know, the other thing, Gil, that I've heard about you, and that, you know, Mark and I talk about leadership and this a lot, is the mentor that you were to young detectives in the Bureau and young investigators in the Bureau. And that's awesome, with that kind of experience that you had, to be willing to share that with the younger guys and bring them along and kind of set that Bureau up for the next generation of great detectives. So Gil Carrillo, El Cucuy, the Boogeyman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm proud to be with you guys.
Yeah.
You put it up in my throat talking about these old guys and talking about me in reverence most of the time. Anything but nice. They talk.
So Gil, before we get into the Nightstalker case, I know you grew up in East Los Angeles, an iconic neighborhood in SoCal, right? You know, a little bit about your background. So what was it like growing up in East LA? And I guess that would have been the 60s, Gil? Is that when you were a teenager there?
I was a teenager in the 60s. I actually grew up in a little town. Everything's connected in LA County. The only separating the cities is center dividing line. One side is one city, the across the street is the other. I grew up in a small city called Pico Rivera, which is actually about 10 miles east of Los Angeles, or 10 to 15, the county line. And it was all, at that time, primarily Hispanic. I grew up in a neighborhood. I hung out on the block. Those were my friends. My mom and dad were both workers. They weren't home much. I was one of 7 kids.
Wow.
6 sisters, no brothers.
Wow.
So my family was actually the boys on the block. I was in the hood, and fortunately for me, I was blessed by meeting one of the local cops, which I didn't understand then. I understand today was just nothing more than great police work. He'd come around, he'd see us, and he'd put us on the hood of the car, pat us down, make us feel like we were, serious criminals. And I didn't realize that he's doing it for his own safety, not just doing it for our entertainment. And so at age 17, I was failing my English class, which means I was not going to graduate. I was going to be the first one in my family not to graduate. And the teacher just told me, you write a term paper and I'll give you a D, which will allow you to pass. And all my teachers would tell my family, my parents, same thing whenever they had a conference with them. Your son is smart. He's just lazy and he won't do the work. And he passed most of the tests, but he just won't do his work. So she said that. And I asked this cop, I said, you said you'd help get us off the streets. Would you help me write a paper? And I want to write it on cops. And so he did. And he took me home and told my parents, sign for him to get off the streets or he'll end up prison and dead. He'll end up either in prison or dead. And so that's what started, that's what changed my life. Age 17, they listened to him and they signed for me, and I went into the Army, ended up in Vietnam, come back after 3 years. I was a changed man. I was mature. I had a new outlook on life, new appreciation. And I came out with 3 goals. One was to be a cop so I could give back what that cop gave me. And that was my life. Number 2, I wanted to go to college. At that time, back in 1970, I was naive and I thought only rich white people went to college. I wanted to go. They let me in because I was a Vietnam vet to the local junior college. And I knew I was mature because when I got my high school transcripts, I was embarrassed to look at them. I obviously thought D stood for damn good. and so I wanted to do good. I wanted to go to college. My third goal was not so nice. I wanted to hook up with my ex-girlfriend that wrote me a Dear John when I was in Vietnam. And I just wanted to hook up with her, getting her eaten out of the palm of my hand. And I wanted revenge. I wanted to get her there and then break up with her and watch her suffer like I had. And so I got out in June of 70. September 70, I had her back eaten out of the palm of my hand. And the day after Christmas, booyah, we got married. And
not quite what you had in mind, huh?
No, but I'm still working on it because we just celebrated our 53rd wedding now.
That's amazing.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's amazing, Gil.
So life has been good. A little odd job starting, and then my goal was to get on the department. So at age 21, I got on. I was accepted, went in, and no time at all, I was out working the streets of East Los Angeles, which was all gangs. It was a gang-infested area. With my background, they found it easy to move me into the gang car because I could relate to the gang members. I could talk like them, and they got along. Then they wanted, I didn't like the way they were working them. And so I just said, just put me back in a regular car, uniform, regular car. I'm fine with that. And a few months later, they came back and they said, we want you to come back to gangs. I said, I don't want to do it. They said, why not? I said, you guys work them wrong. You need plain clothes people out there. These gangsters won't talk to you in uniform. There's a lack of trust. And they said, well, that's what we're going to do. We want you to head up the unit. So I started the first plainclothes gang unit out there in East LA. Did that for 3 years. And then there were enough murders out there and assaults. I got to interact with the guys from Homicide. They got to know me and I got to know them. And pretty soon, I get notified that they're asking me. It was my dream to work as a homicide cop, watching the way they work, how meticulous they were, how they directed everybody, and I don't care what rank they were. They told everybody, including the lieutenants and captain, what to do, get out of the way. And so that's what I wanted. And before I know it, in March 23rd, 1981, I got transferred up to Sheriff's Homicide Bureau, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened. And worked there for 21 years as an investigative detective. Went on loan for a year or two, working out of the office of the sheriff. Then I had promoted to sergeant by this time, and then after a couple of years, they promoted me to lieutenant and sent me back to Homicide Bureau. They said they need your leadership. They need you back there. It's a round hole and a round peg and a round hole.
Yep. So Gil, was Homicide, before you joined the sheriff's department, was it something you thought about, or was it just strictly from being a patrol deputy, getting that interaction with the guys and seeing what they did?
No, it was just from working patrol. I can tell you right now, I remember I had a brand new boot, a trainee with me, 3 o'clock car out of East Los Angeles, and they gave us a 187 right out of the station. Went up to Humphreys and Floral, which was a T intersection there, and car was facing north, suspect vehicles facing north, and the victim car was right behind him, and the guy in front wouldn't turn on the red light. It's like, it's red, and he's not going to turn, no car's coming. The guy finally got pissed, was honking his horn, walked out of the car and went and kicked his door, and the driver of that car very calmly just shot him.
Wow.
When he came up and kicked his door, just plugged him, then the light turned green, then he took off. And they had a witness in the corner house that had a partial license plate, and that was it. And so they gave me the call right out. I went out there, and they had just given us this yellow caution tape, stay out of the crime scene. And new charge sign, everybody has to sign in, whoever's going in to look. And so the watch commander got out there from East LA, and he comes out there, and I said, "Sir, you want to sign the login sheet?" And he says, "Might I remind you of my position? I'm the watch commander. I do what I want, deputy, and I don't sign in login sheets." And he went walking across the tape and went over there, and he's looking around. Barrett Fitzgerald, my first team lieutenant in Homicide Bureau. He was an investigative sergeant at that time from Homicide. He came up, big guy, had to stand I stand 6'3". He had to be about 6'4". And he just came up and took his hand out there and said, "Good afternoon, kid. My name is Sergeant Barrett Fitzgerald, but please call me Fitz." I said, "Okay, sir." He said, "No." I said, "Fitz." "No, sir, just call me Fitz." I said, "Okay, Fitz. My name's Gil." And he says, "Tell me what happened." I said, "Well, I'm in the station. I get notified. I get this." He says, "Hold that thought. Who is that in my crime scene over there?" I said, "That's watch commander." I said, "What?" He said, "What is he doing?" I said, "I don't know. I tried to get him to sign in. He reminded me of his position versus mine and said he did what he wanted." And I said, "Oh, he did? Okay. I'll be right back." He walked up to the watchman. He walked right up to the lieutenant and said, "Good afternoon, Lieutenant. Sergeant Barrett Fitzgerald, Sheriff's Homicide Bureau." Didn't say call me Fitz.
Right.
And he just said, "Hello, Sergeant Fitzgerald." And Fitz said, "May I ask you what you're doing?" He said, "Well, I just want to take a look at the crime scene and look at the victim." And he said, "Well, would you do me a favor?" He said, "How about stepping behind that yellow caution tape and look from out there, not at my crime scene?" The lieutenant turned red, turned around, got in his car, and took off like a bat out of hell.
Right.
I was a 3 o'clock car. I came in the next day to go to work. Fitz and his partner were still in the same clothes, had been working all night long, and they were still at it. And I'm saying, damn, that's what I want to do when I grow up.
Right.
I mean, to be able to tell the watch commander to pack it in his ass, to be able to do whatever you want to do and still work. Nobody's telling you, hurry up, go home, get out. You're your own boss. And it was like a whodunit. Nobody knew. And I told him, "Man, that's what I want to do." He says, "You ever been to an autopsy?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, if we're around and you're around, we'll take you to this one." Next day I was in court. They saw me, said, "Hey, kid, we're going to the post. You want to go?" They took me to an autopsy, and I was hooked. I just wanted to go, although at the autopsy I was a little probably pale.
Right. Right.
But But I was hooked. I wanted to go. These guys did it. They were pros, and everybody treated them with dignity and respect. And so I just made up my mind then. That's what I want to do when I grow up.
So, Gil, you made detective, and what was it, about 10 years then?
It was a little less than 10 years. It was unheard of. Sheriff's Homicide took 15 years to get up there on an minimal average. And I was, for the first 7 years up there, I was called a kid. I was the youngest guy in the bureau.
Right. So I guess fast forward then to 1985, March 17th, 1985 in Rosemead. Two things I want to get into in a little detail here. This is Maria Hernandez, right? And
yes.
Dayle
Okazaki.
So Maria's coming home, opens a garage door, pulls into the garage, and I guess the Nightstalker follows her into the garage, Gil. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
But instead of just shooting her from behind or attacking her or whatever, it seems like he made a deliberate noise. He banged on the car or he banged on something, right? And
yes.
I thought it was interesting that, what did you call that? A deviancy or something like that? And it went back to something you said you'd learned in college.
Yes, a sign of sexual deviancy. Best instructor I've ever had. Brilliant man, retired FBI agent, Dr. Robert Morneau. And he was just brilliant. And I took 2 semesters of advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes. And it required more work than I'd ever done. And he was such a good instructor. And he used humor as his vehicle to get his points across. I asked him at the beginning, do you mind if we tape record you? And he said, I don't care. Do whatever you want. I recorded every one of his classes. Every class that I recorded was totally useless to me afterwards because all you do is hear me laughing, covering up his instruction. But he was good. He says that when somebody comes up, someone like would be a Richard, and pointed a gun at your forehead as he's walking up to you, his intent is not to shoot you. He's looking for that fear. He wants to see the terror, fear in your eyes. That is foreplay for sex to him. That is a sign of sexual deviancy. Now, if you can imagine being a young investigator, the youngest in the bureau, trying to sell that theory to somebody, they're going to say, you're full of hot air. And that's essentially what happened. No, I didn't sit there and say, that's what he did the first night. But then, with Maria Hernandez, but then he goes inside and he shoots. What happened was Maria Hernandez is holding a set of keys in her hand. He shoots her. She had already hit the close button on the garage door, time that takes 8 seconds from the time you hit the button for the garage door to close and the light go out. Richard hit the top of a car that was parked in there, Dayle Okazaki's car. He's walking on a piece of carpet runner just so they have something to walk on. And so he's quiet. He slaps the roof of the car to get her to turn around. And so I'm questioning, why is he making a deliberate noise? He wanted her to see him. And he comes walking at her point shoulder. And just before he's pulling the trigger, the lights go out. Richard will tell me later, he thought that he was in hell. He thought he was dead because his ears were ringing. He was blind now because the lights went out. He just the flash, the lights, and his ears are ringing. He thought he was dead initially. Maria went down to the ground from the impact. He then just pushed her legs out of the way. She had already unlocked the door. He goes inside the condo proper. Maria, the bullet never exited her hand. She had her hands right in front of her face. He never exited. She jumps up, hits the garage door, and runs out through the garage, through the back alley. And as she's running, she hears a second gunshot. So she goes around the building to the front, feeling that Richard is going to go ahead and escape the same way he went in through the garage door. And instead, he comes right out the front door, sees her on the other side. They play a little cat and mouse around Volkswagen. She finally puts her hands in the air and says, don't shoot me again. You've already shot me once. And he put the gun down by his side and walked away. He did not run. And they hear a car speeding away around a corner, but he never did run away. He walked away simply. At autopsy, and then we learned Dayle Okazaki, she is shot right in the forehead. I mean, you couldn't get a better 10-ring shot, and there was stippling all around it, which, for those who don't understand, that's the unburnt powder from the gun that comes out of the barrel, and it actually creates what we call a tattooing. It creates burn marks in your head. Well, that tells us how close he was, and what it did was she was on one side of a kitchen counter, he was on the other. He was quiet. He wasn't moving. He was waiting for her to get up. She put her hands on the ledge of the countertop and lifted her head up to see where he was. He was on the other side waiting for her to lift her head up, and then he popped her right in the head. At autopsy, we learned she's got an abrasion in the back of her head. So that told me he hit her in the back of the head with a gun first. Why didn't he shoot her when he had the chance? Yet he hit her in the back of the head. Then he waited on the other side of the countertop for her to stick her head up. Now that to me was something this guy's different. You know, why did he make the deliberate sound? Why did he wait after we find the abrasion in the back of the head? Why didn't he just kill her when she was down?
Right.
And he didn't. So things started just, it didn't add up to me.
Yeah. Gil, the other part of this one, Gil, was, I want to see if I got this right now. My understanding is that Maria Hernandez's mom came to the crime scene, and it turns out she lived just a couple doors down from you growing up. I mean,
Yes.
what? So as a homicide investigator, when when all of a sudden you have this personal connection, what does that feel like? Or what was how did that strike you?
I just had to convince her that we were going to do everything we could to solve the case, and it wasn't going to go away. And she was a little bit concerned that perhaps because her daughter and Maria was Hispanic, that she wouldn't get the full attention of everybody. She was naive to that. And when she called out, I was silhouetted inside this living room doing my crime scene investigation. She was standing outside. The deputy comes in and says, Gil, the lady wants to talk to us, Maria's mother. I said, okay, just please ask her if I can get just a couple more minutes, and then I'll stop what I'm doing and get outside and talk to her. And just then I heard her voice, because she could see me. She said, Gilbert, is that you? And I'm sitting there saying, nobody calls me Gilbert. I'm Gil. Gilbert was when I was a kid. I'm too cool for Gilbert now.
Right.
And I said, yes, it is. I said, she goes, it's me, Pauline. Then I recognized the voice, and I said, Pumpkin, is that you? Because everybody had a name back in the streets. And she says, yes. And I said, well, yes, God. Well, that's when I found out it was Maria's mom, and she was concerned, and I told her we'd do everything possible. She just didn't have much confidence in us at that time.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, if I may, Gil, I'm glad that Bill brought that aspect of it up, because I was going to ask the same question about that. You and I have similar backgrounds in the sense, I mean, geographically and educationally. I think we're both ELAC Huskies. Is that right? And,
yes,
yeah, East Los Angeles College is ELAC, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, I spent my entire 30 years in Los Angeles County with the Highway Patrol, and unfortunately arrested a couple of high school classmates over the years and things like that. When you're talking about when you were a kid and kind of getting getting stopped and frisked by the sheriff's department and other law enforcement right there, and then later on growing up, and there's no doubt like this, you know, coming across the mother of one of the victims that you're working with, I know you must have been immersed in that situation even before homicide, maybe even especially before homicide, with coming across people that you had grown up with. I mean, is that probably the case?
No, it wasn't with she was always a nice girl, although she had a nickname. She was a nice girl. And my parents had actually baptized Maria Hernandez. I hadn't seen Maria Hernandez since she was about six months old.
Wow.
Because Pumpkin, Pauline had gotten divorced, moved on, and moved out of the neighborhood. As far as once I became a cop, you know, there were two of us from the same block that became cops, and both for the sheriff's department. And one guy, he was a real tough guy, you know, and he was tougher than I was. I know I didn't want to fight him, but he was a tough kid. And when he found out that I was coming on, and he was about 3 months ahead of me on the department. He came up to me and he told me, you got to forget where you came from, who you were, leave all that stuff behind because it's a different world now. You're not that guy. You're different, and just stay away from everybody over here. Well, as time went on, I think if I could give my own attribute, I've never forgotten where I came from. And I tell that to all young cops, anybody who wants to go to homicide, anybody who wants to move up, never forget where you came from. Remember where you started. So as time went on, I could go back into my block, and those guys would welcome me with open arms. They were proud of me because I had made it out and I was doing good. And Robert, the other guy, they didn't want him anywhere near the neighborhood. They said, hey, tell you come back, we'll kick his ass. Because they did not like him at all for the way he was treating them after he became a cop. And I never changed. And that the advice the cop gave me or gave my parents held true, because everybody that stood back, everybody that got off the block, and at that time, Vietnam War was going on, everybody that got off the block and went into the armed forces ended up leading a productive life after they got out. And those that didn't ended up either dead or in jail.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
It's
the way it was.
interesting. Really interesting. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah. So Gil, that same night, then 40 minutes later, just down the road in Monterey Park, and these are suburbs that are just east of L.A. for people who don't know.
Yes.
Tsai-Lian Yu is shot.
Yes.
And pulled out of her car. I guess kind of like almost like a random shooting in the road. Gil, did you make a connection right away that this was the same, related to the earlier incident, or what happened with that?
No, we didn't find out. I did not make a connection immediately. I knew we had a Chinese girl, and Dayle Okazaki was Japanese. My partner at the time said, oh, they're not connected. I mean, one's Chinese, one Japanese. They don't mess around with each other. And we didn't have enough information because at that time, unfortunately for us, the city of Monterey Park and their chief of police, they were not the street cops, but the executives of the department. They didn't like Big Brother. Big Brother would have been the sheriff's department. Monterey Park is a fairly small city, small department. They didn't like sharing information. They didn't want us to have anything to do with them. They used our crime lab, and that's about it. So we didn't find out about it right away, other than there was a shooting, a murder. And then we found out, because it went to our crime lab, that it was the same caliber bullet that was used in the Dayle Okazaki murder. And at that time, we had another murder. We had a double homicide, City Whittier. And we found out that they were all the same caliber, but we couldn't say the same gun because the bullets were so mutilated. But again, with Tsai-Lian Yu, he drug her out of the car. She saw him coming. He had been following her in a car, and he finally pulled up around in front of her, stopped. She starts yelling, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And she puts it in reverse. She backs into a parked car. So now she's stuck. He comes up to her. She's screaming, "Get away from me." He opens the door, pulls her out of the driver's side, shoots her 2 shots to the abdominal wall, and then leaves her in the street. She doesn't die there in the street. They actually pick her up, put her in an ambulance, take her. She died at the hospital. But informants at that time, witnesses around there, all they could hear, they gave a very small description, but they said they thought it was a boyfriend-girlfriend fighting, arguing. And some people say he got in the passenger seat. There was absolutely no disturbance in the passenger seat, anything on there. It was all done out of the driver's side.
Right. And then the double murder you were talking about in Whittier, was that the Zazarra?
Yes.
The Zazarra case. And Gil, on that one, it's like the deviancy got even greater or more deranged. I mean, did he cut the eyes of one of the victims out in that?
Yes. Max Zazarra was asleep on the couch, and he went and shot him. It was a contact wound in the left side of the temple area, off to the left, just above the ear. And then he went with her. And he was a businessman. She was an attorney. And from surviving victims, we have statements that Richard made. He used to say, "Don't look at me or I'll cut your eyes out. Shut up, bitch. Where's the money? Where's the jewelry?" Well, we can only surmise, since there weren't any surviving witnesses or victims there, that he said, "Don't look at me or I'll cut your eyes out." And he's a man of his word.
Right.
He said he was going to do it, and he did. But he did stab her multiple times. And he left a big T cut under her left breast, looked like a T. And I asked Richard, I said, "Hey, what was that cut under the breast for? What was it? Looked like a T." He told me he was trying to cut her heart out, but couldn't get through the bone.
Ooh.
Obviously, he missed the anatomy class and didn't realize that he was going to have to cut through bone to get to the heart.
Jeez.
And a sexual assault in this case too, Gil, right?
Well, we didn't have a sexual assault. He stabbed her several times in the abdomen, all the way down into the pubic area. So we didn't get any sex out of her.
Right. And this was, I think, the first case where you actually found a shoe print.
Yes, we found a shoe print where he had stepped on a 5-gallon empty plastic paint bucket to go in the bathroom window, and then we found some out in the garden in the flower bed, and we found two different pair of shoes. One was we matched to a pair of shoes owned by the Mr. Zazarra,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one was at a Via footprint.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gil, the child abductions, I mean, one thing I had never realized about this case, I mean, it was the murder part I'd heard about, the sexual assaults I heard about. I never really heard about the child abduction aspect to it. And that, to me, that's the scariest part, that he was going into houses and kidnapping children from their beds, taking them to a place, abusing them, and then dropping them off somewhere. Can you talk about that string of abductions and what kind of led you to believe early on that it might be the same guy? Because that's one of the more, I don't know, I guess maybe, what would you say, Gil, controversial calls that you made early on in the case?
It was the one that got me more headache than I ever anticipated. But one thing today, one of my best friends today was a guy that they teamed me up with, because my lieutenant said, "Okay, kid, you're going to break in the next sergeant that comes up here." And I said, "Oh no, don't do that to me. I'm not ready for that. I'm not good enough for that yet." And he said, "No, you're good. You just lack confidence." And he says, "You're real good. So what I'm going to do," and I said, "Wait a minute, if you're going to do that, team me up with Ray Verdugo. Let me learn from him some more." And Ray Verdugo is one of my best friends still today. Ray finally confessed to me just this last year. He really didn't believe me in the beginning, but he did badmouth me.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Gil, that was really tough to accept what you were putting out, because no place in criminal history had it ever been documented that somebody was doing this. And since that time, nobody's ever done it again, because either they're not sexually deviant, like far enough to the left as Richard was, or they just don't know about him, what he was doing." And what put it together for me was the physical description. First off, we were just going in a transition from identikit, the old identikit with the clear acetate. Matter of fact, those are probably before you guys' time. Like putting together Mr. Potato Head, but only with this clear acetate, laying it over, lines for mustaches, eyebrows, lines for noses. And when you put them all on top of each other, it looks like a face. Then you'd Xerox that, and that's how you'd come out with an identikit picture. And so we were using identikits at that time, just transitioning into sketch artists just coming out. I'll tell you what he looked like, and they've drawn. Well, with Maria Hernandez, we sent a sketch artist out there, and she told him what it looked like. And when she was done, she says, "Yeah, that looks like him." Well, I'm showing that sketch artist rendition to some of the detectives at one of the local stations right there at East LA Station. And the guy from the crime lab, a friend of mine, comes up, he says, "Hey, Gil, hold that thought. I got something I want to show you." He went out to his car, he comes back, and he shows me an identikit. And the identikit was of a suspect that tried to kidnap a 12-year-old girl. And you put them together, and it looks like the same guy. And when you listen to their physical descriptions, they're the same. Black members only type jacket, brown stained gap teeth, curly disheveled hair, pungent odor to them. They smell, and these dark athletic shoes, black athletic shoes. So now I have a kidnapping going on with the same physical description that Maria Hernandez is giving. And that's one. Then I have another child abduction of a 5-year-old girl out of Montebello that had the very same physical description. And she survived. Then there was a girl out of LAPD's area, Maria Sandoval. She's kidnapped and she has the very same description. So I had these 3 descriptions all describing the same guy that sounded like they're an abductor of kids, but I also had the same abductor description from Maria Hernandez. When Sandoval was killed or was abducted, he took her to a construction site where he violated her and he stepped in wet cement. He left behind via footprint there. So now I had a footprint, physical description, and a footprint over at this Zazarra location. So to me, this sexual deviancy stuff was first and foremost because of the great Dr. Robert Morneau. And that's when I started putting them together. Of course, any old homicide cop thought, as they should have, oh, this young. And I was hearing this young punk Mexican is just trying to make a name for himself. You know, and a lot of that was coming, some of it was coming from Monterey Park. Really, I had a buddy working over there. He says, oh, Gil, every time you come out of there, they're motherfucking you.
Right. What about the leadership of the Bureau, Gil? I'm sorry, Mark, were you going to say something?
Well, about that, and don't forget your question, Bill. Yeah. But Gil, you know, when I watched the documentary, which is so fast, I watched it twice. It's so well done. One of the things that I was never satisfied about, I mean, as far as curiosity, in your opinion, you're talking about the great Dr. Morneau from your crime classes. In your opinion, why did Richard Ramirez not, and thank God he didn't, why did he not kill these children? Was there something that you learned about? Because I watched that documentary twice, and there really wasn't ever an opinion given, as far as I remember, about why he let them go. I mean, let them go, obviously knowing who he was, having all this identification, able to identify him. In your opinion, what was the reasoning behind that, or what was his thought process behind it?
He said, in order for people, the reason he killed people was if you offered any resistance at all, you died. If you acquiesced to his commands, you survived. And he had control over the children. They didn't put up any fights. He just took them. They did what he said. And I don't understand why he didn't. When he asked me at one time, he said, why do you think I am the way I am? And I just looked at him. I said, Rich, goddamn, if I were a doctor making a lot more money than I am as a cop, I could give you that answer, but that's not for me to answer. I'm only here to gather the facts and get you prosecuted. I can't tell you why he did it, and nor can I tell you why he didn't. I know after I retired in 2010, San Francisco contacted me because through DNA, which we did not have in 85, through DNA, they made him on a murder of I believe she was 10 years old, a girl up in San Francisco, and they made him on DNA, and the girl put up a fight. I know that she had resisted and put up a fight, so she ended up dead. So the only thing I can surmise by this is you acquiesced, as he said, you lived. If you didn't, you died.
Well, the answer to the question.
And Gil, what about, to dig deeper into that, how was he choosing these victims? Because it seemed like it was so diverse, Asian, Hispanic, young, old. There seemed like such diversity in victims. How was he choosing them? And was there something that was a determining factor as to whether he would sexually assault them or not?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that question at all. Bob Morneau, I'll never give him enough praise. He says, sex is, for definition purposes of the class only, sex is whatever makes you feel good. So if I give you a condo in Mammoth, flickering fireplace, snowing outside, no phones, no outside distractions, white bearskin rug, hors d'oeuvres on the coffee table, you and that special someone you want to be with, another member of society, are there with romantic music going on. and you're both fresh out of the shower. Now, that describes something that most people would say is going to turn into a unadulterated sexual interlude. That's going to be a fun night. And because that is sex in your mind, that makes you feel good. I give you another guy that can't afford to go to Mammoth, and he doesn't have a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, but he's got a bottle of white port or a bottle of Budweiser in his back pocket. He's up in the hills of Malibu, and he's not with another member of society, but he's got a book of matches with him, and he's got his member in his own hand in an act of masturbation because he just set the hills of Malibu on fire because he's a pyromaniac, and that is sex to him. So sex is whatever makes you feel good. So if he wanted those kids at the time, that was sex to him. And if he wanted anybody, you know, it's kind of like, sometimes I use analogies that people don't understand. They say, I'm a sexual deviant. But, you know, if you remember, both of you, when you were much younger, and you'd go to a party or you'd go to a bar, and you'd look at people all around because you want to end up with a lady that night. You look around and the pickings, you know, you ain't going to get any of this stuff, and all the good ones keep going. And then it gets towards the end of the night, and there's that ugly one waiting. And that's the only thing available. She's going to get it. And see, I can see the captain. I can see the chief laughing. He's been there.
I say, wait, were you spying on me 35 years ago? What the hell's going on here?
So that's what he did. He was an opportunist that took advantage of it. Now, his selection, number one, he tells me he loved Asian women, Asians. And you'd say Asian, you go, ooh, he'd salivate. You know, he liked Asian women. We found a crime partner of his before he started killing people. And he said that Richard liked hitting Asian houses because they had better booty. And when I say booty, I mean the loot, the items he was going to steal. So they'd have better stuff to steal. And he said, not only that, the cops really didn't give a shit about Asians, so they wouldn't work it that hard. So he was picking houses, and he would drive around hot summer nights. People had their windows open, their blinds open, lights on, silhouette on inside, so he'd see who was in there. And a couple of houses he went back to, he hit more than once. He went back because he thought kids, he had seen kids in the area. And so he wanted kids.
Yeah. Gil, around this time, and this is something I was curious about because it's something that I suffered from as an investigator. Around this time in the case, I think there was some young ladies in East LA or somewhere east of Los Angeles that reported a suspicious guy following them, and you put a surveillance team on him, and they're following him around, and man, he's looking suspicious. And you do a search warrant at his house, and there's some deviant stuff there. There's a black members only jacket. And when I saw that, I said to myself, man, I would have locked in right on that. How do you let go of that suspect? How do you not get so tunnel vision on that guy that you try to sell yourself that that's the guy when you get that information?
You do it we put the surveillance on him, and the guy was a freak. He was such a freak. The night that we put the surveillance team on him, the guy that broke me in Homicide, Don Garcia, very dear friend, and another guy, Louis the Hat Danoff. I had parked, by this time I had a motorhome, and I parked it right there at East LA Station because I was spending so much time away from home. I needed someplace to be able to relax. And so we went to my motorhome and we listened to the surveillance as it was going on. And Don Garcia told me at the end of the surveillance, he says, hey, I'll tell you right now, he's a freak, but he's not your freak. And he planted it there. And then we had a lineup eventually with him in it. And he was not the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had to let him go. Unfortunately, the sad part, and I don't know whatever happened to him, we sealed everything that we did with related to him. And a couple of months later down the road, I get called by a DA. They found this guy around an elementary school, and they hooked him up. And they wanted to use my surveillance stuff and my reports on him so they could use it in prosecution against him. And we couldn't do it. I wouldn't give it up. And so he was a sexual deviant. He just wasn't mine. And I hope he's in custody or he's moved on to the hereafter.
Right.
But I couldn't do anything with it.
Right. So And next, Gil, I think when Frank Salerno's partner retires, talk about when he approached you about partnering up, because we haven't spoken too much about Frank. And the Hillside Strangler case, which predated this, Frank was pretty well known throughout LA for his work on that case, and for the homicide detective that he was. Talk about your relationship with him and when he approached you to partner up, and what that was about.
That I got the Homicide in 1981, and so having been there, March of '85 would have been 4 years. So Christmas of '84, we're at a Christmas party for the Homicide Bureau, and that night, and Frank is everything that you just described. He's well known. He's the Goomba. He's the guru. Everybody respected him. He walked around very proudly. He knew his stuff, and he was good. And so certainly somebody like me would get close to Frank. He's a longtime bureau member, and I'm just a kid. He approached me that night. We were getting a drink, and he says, "Hey, kid," he says, "let me ask you something. Would you consider becoming my partner? My partner just retired. How about you ever think about hooking up with me?" And I said, "Well, I could certainly think about that. That'd be all right." And he says, "Okay." He said, "We'll talk about it." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." I went back and I told my wife, I said, "Frank Salerno just asked me to be his partner." He says, "And?" I said, "And that's Frank Salerno. Don't you understand?" I was fine. He could have had anybody in the bureau that he wanted. And he came to this young man and asked, and I said yes. So that was at the Christmas party. In January, he calls me up and he says, "Hey, you busy?" I said, "No." He said, "I'm about meeting you at East LA Station." We met at East LA Station. And he says, "I just want to ask you something." He says, "That night at the Christmas party, I was in my cups. And I don't know if you remember, but I asked you if you'd be considered being my partner." I said, "Yeah, I remember. I was in my cups that night also." I figured, okay, now he's letting me down easy. He was drunk and didn't really mean it. And this way I could say, "Yeah, well, I really didn't mean it." I understand.
Right.
And he says, "I was in my cups." And I said, "Yeah, so was I." And he said, "Well, I'm not in my cups right now." He says, "I'm asking you." He says, "You still consider hooking up with me?" And I said, "Sure, no doubt." He says, "Good, because I've already talked to the captain about it, and he's going to make it happen." And so I was excited to be able to be asked, number one, and to be able to hook up with a man that was certainly one of the big leaders and historically one of the great investigators of Sheriff's Homicide Bureau. I was excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, rightly
And
so.
ironically, Gil, go ahead, Mark.
No, I just said rightly so. It's a huge deal, and it's one of the most fascinating parts of the entire story to me, Gil. Having been a cop and knowing the importance of these relationships and really succession planning, and what it must have felt like for you to be in that position and realizing what was going to open up for you now, and really what he thought of you, what you can actually bring to the sheriff's department in that role with the bureau. I just been in those situations, and I cannot overstate to the audience how important that must have been to you, not just about you, but really about the health of the department, knowing what he thought about you for the future.
Well, it meant an awful lot. It still does, that Frank chose me. Not until the documentary. I never asked him, but in the documentary, they asked him, why did you pick Gil? And he said, because I was young, I was Hispanic, I spoke the language, enthusiastic, and he just thought we'd make a good team. And so whatever his reasoning was, I don't care.
Right.
I was happy and it worked, and I have nothing but respect for him. And then, a while, just a couple of years ago, a good friend of Frank's, who's a retired captain from our bureau, we were at a luncheon, and we're just talking. And he says, Frank's probably the greatest homicide cop, best homicide cop that ever worked the bureau. And a couple of guys jumped on the captain and said, "Hey, what are you talking about? He's the best there is. What about Gil?" And, Gil's just as good, if, turned out to be better than Frank. And I said, "Hey, stop." I said, "Let me ease your thinking." I said, to the captain, I said, Don, Frank, in my opinion, is the most consummate homicide cop I've ever worked with or ever worked around. He's brilliant. He's good. He does some things better. He's the most organized cop that I've ever worked with. And I told Frank early on, if I learn half of your organization, I'll be good, because I'm just a Mexican that puts stuff down and, we'll find it later. When I'm looking for the comment, I'll see the bullet that I was looking for. Right. So that's just the way it was. We worked out, and we were supposed to get together right away. And unfortunately, the guy that they had, I was going to go to Frank. Mm-hmm. They had a guy coming right back off of being off. He was sick. The guy that I was working with, and I won't mention his name, but he was a gruff old guy, and he was what people would refer to as an asshole. And he was. He was a tough old guy. And this guy just coming back from being off of stress, heart problems, they said, if we put him with Gil's partner right now, it'll kill him. Because my partner before I hooked up with him had died of a heart attack. And they said, we don't want to, so you stay with your partner for a while, and we put this other guy with Frank. And that was fine. So Frank and I actually didn't hook up until June the 28th. So all those times, it wasn't. Now, what Frank did around April, when I started sounding off about the kids and the murders, mm-hmm. and saying, I think we got a serial killer. Now, the way they assign the cases, you get a case, you're up on call, you go to that murder. Well, I wasn't getting all these murders. I certainly wasn't getting child abductions because I had nothing to do with it. But because I had this information, I was following up on every one of them. Right. I tracked those cases at that time. I could give you dates, times, addresses, everything related to the cases. And I'm sitting there when I attended the meeting, I'm saying, I think we got one guy doing all this stuff. Well, the captain, and you know what it's like. If somebody said there's a serial killer, that sets off mass hysteria. Mm-hmm. Yep. So you got to be sure before you go ahead and say, hey, we got a serial killer. So the captain told Frank, who was the acting lieutenant at the time for my team, and he says, look into this, see if there is a serial killer going on. Well, there wasn't enough evidence, and Frank really didn't believe it. Like I said, I don't begrudge anybody for not believing it. It was tough nut. And so it was kind of let go. There wasn't a task force formed. There wasn't anything. Everybody just kept working your cases. And I just kept following up every possible case that I could, including those with Monterey Park.
Yeah, I know, like, if we're talking the end of June, beginning of July, there was a quick string in Arcadia and Sierra Madre, all these cases.
Yes.
And I want to say the July 5th in Sierra Madre, a bloody footprint on a comforter. And am I correct that kind of changed things because now you had physical evidence to kind of connect some of these things?
Well, now we had, on June the 28th, we had Elaine Higgins in Arcadia. Mm-hmm. And her throat, aside from the sexual assault she had, her throat was sliced from ear to ear. I mean, she's almost totally decapitated. On July the 2nd, 4 days later, we had Mary Cannon. Her throat was sliced, just like Elaine Higgins, and her hands looked like they had been ligatured behind her. So we have those two cases. We believe, even Frank believes, those may be, they're related. Mm-hmm. This murder, Mary Cannon is definitely related to Elaine Higgins. When we go to Elaine Higgins' house on the 28th, I'm looking around for that footprint. I'm digging, I'm thinking this, and nothing. We go to Mary Cannon's house, and we're looking, and she had brand new carpeting. And I get down on my hands and knees, and I'm looking at this thing, and I think, big word, think, I can see the Avia footprint down the carpet. But I know that I can't think with my heart. Mm-hmm. I got to think with my mind. So we cut that thing out immediately, gave it to a radio car from Arcadia, had them rush it down to our crime lab so they could get photographs with oblique lighting, mm-hmm. so they could catch it. So they did. They're gone. Now, July the 5th, we're still carrying on as normal routine. On July the 4th, there was we were working the evening shift, and they came up with a murder inside the jail. It was a stabbing, a fight, a stabbing. So Frank's the acting lieutenant. I'm just a regular investigator. I'm going to go home. When Frank approached me and said, "Hey, Gil, how about you want to go with us and help us, interview inmates over there because there's going to be a shit pot." I said, "Sure, let's go. I'd love more." So we go down and we're tired. When you figure that program, the first 48, I mean, we're busy the first 24, 48 hours. Well, July the 28th, we're busy. And then 4 days later, we get the one in Mary Cannon on July 2nd. Now, 3 days later, you get the Bennett case. So on the 4th, we're in there working these interviews in the jail. I get home. My family's not home. By this time, my family is frightened. They've moved out. They're either staying at my family's house or at her family's house. And they call me up. It's like I just get home. The bureau calls me up and they said, "Hey, you got another one in Sierra Madre. We want you to go look at." And I said, "Okay." So they give me the information. I'm easy going. And they said, "You want to call up your partner? You want us to call him?" And I said, "No, I better call him up." I said, "He's the Italian stallion and he's not going to be happy." So I call him up. And at that time, he didn't like me and called Frankie. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, Frankie, we got another one." And he's going, "Can I tell you what he said?" He said, "You sick motherfucker, this better not be one of your jokes." I said, "I'm not, Frankie. This is serious stuff. Somebody's hurt. They need our help. Gil, this is nothing to mess around with. I'm tired. We're all tired." I said, "Frankie, I'm ready to roll. I got to go. Here's the address. I'll either see you there or I won't." And he said, "You son of a bitch, you better be there." So he rolls up and it was the Whitney Bennett case. And we did see about 10:30 that morning, Giselle Laubinier from our crime lab. It was like right out of watching Dragnet on TV. We're in the living room, kitchen area. She's in the bedroom processing it. And she comes out and she says, "Hey, fellas, I found something in here, maybe of interest to you." And she showed it to us. And I just said, "Kiss my ass." Frank said, "Yeah, kiss your ass." And we walked out. And he says, "Okay, tell me everything you got in your head right now." And then he called our cap and said, we definitely have a serial killer.
Yeah. And Gil, when you were up to speed on all those other cases, was that something you just kind of took on yourself because of the theory that you had? In other words, no one told you originally, "Hey, get up to speed on everything that's going on here."
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I was working it on my own.
Right. The next one, Gil, that I remember is an interesting one just because it was the house of a deputy, right? There's a July 6th, the house of a deputy gets hit. John Rodriguez.
John Rodriguez was a deputy sheriff working the jails. He was a young deputy. Him and his wife were living in Pico Rivera, which is where my family lived. And my wife's family both lived in Pico Rivera. And she's asleep on the couch. All of a sudden, she hears some noise. Sounds like the window to the dining room has just been opened, or somebody's trying to open the window. And she yells to her husband, John. He comes in there and he said, "What is it?" He says, "Somebody just tried to come in the window." And he said, "Oh, you're crazy. I painted that window and I've never cleaned up the paint, so it's been sealed shut for a couple of years now." And he said, "Look," he went and he pulled back the curtain and there's paint chips all over the floor. And you can see the window is partially open. And outside that window later on, there was an Avia footprint. And so we knew the deputies out there this young deputy put a box over the footprint to make sure nothing got destroyed. And then he put yellow tape around 2 houses on each side. He was at parade rest when I got there. If anybody would have tried to go in, they were going to get shot.
Right.
Talk about preserving a crime scene.
I was going to say, he didn't forget his academy days. Hey, start big. You can always go ahead and compress it. And
exactly.
good for him.
He did a great job. I know a couple of days later, I went back to attend a briefing over there, and the undersheriff happened to be there. And I had told the undersheriff about this job that this kid had done out there. It was a great job. And so here comes a kid walking down the hall. And I said, "Hey, come here." I said, "Bob, this is Deputy so-and-so. And this is the guy I told you about and how he did a brilliant job preserving that crime." He says, "Oh, yeah, great job. I heard all about it." And I said, okay. He said, well, thank you, sir. And then he went on to the head. And as he walked away, Bob Edmonds said, what did he do? Tell me about that again. And I reminded him, he said, oh, yeah. I went in the restroom and there's a deputy who says, hey, who was that guy that I was talking to? Right. Second in command, he had no idea who he was, but they did do a great job. And it's almost funny to say because I know the wife of John Rodriguez appeared in the documentary. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if John did or not. He may have, but they appeared, and it's ironic that there are 3 cases, I believe, right off the top of my head. Let's see, Zazarra, Doy, Cabanas, and this one where they were sleeping in opposite rooms, bedroom versus couch and stuff like that. And not too long afterwards, they ended up in divorce. Right. Rodriguez. Right. So I'm sitting there, I said, hey, what's up with your wife? He goes, oh, she's sick. I talked to him later. I said, she was real sick, huh? Making fun of him. Right. And he just laughed.
Yeah. Hey, Gil, the obvious shoe. So now maybe a good time to talk about that. I mean, going through, I guess you guys identified the maker of it and somehow learned that there was, this is what I found was crazy. There was 1 pair that was sold in L.A.?
Yes. There was, the guy that held the patent on it was a guy named Jerry Stubblefield. He was a track and field coach for Oregon. And him and his son worked it. They got it. It was an aerobic shoe. And so we got all of his records. He was very, very cooperative. And we could account for all the shoes that came in January 9th, 1985. 1,356 pair of Model 440 and be size 11.5, 12 entered the United States from New York, from Taiwan, for distribution throughout the U.S., of which 6 pair ended up in the state of California, 1 pair ended up in the city of Los Angeles, and that was the black model. And that's what he was using, was a black model. And so we were able to identify it, where it was sold. We couldn't account for Foot Locker. Foot Locker has their offices, their headquarters in Arizona. We didn't find we couldn't get their distribution list. But it was, what we did find was almost as good as a fingerprint.
Yeah. And Gil, the other thing, that struck me was, at this point in these series of killings and attacks is how comfortable I think he became, where he would stay in the house, the Nightstalker would, or Ramirez would, for long periods of time, and he would eat in the kitchen. Like, what is that all about?
I don't know. He was hungry, I guess. Maybe he's a Gil Carrillo.
Right.
He would eat when he felt like it. He did it in Diamond Bar. He did it in Monrovia. He just felt like eating, and he did.
Interesting, man. And he just comfortable staying in the house and spending time there.
He was in no hurry. He was good at what he did. There's no doubt he was probably one of the better burglars that I've ever encountered. But he was good at his craft. And I just told him, unfortunate for you, we're good at our craft. You're going to go down.
Right. So, Gil, I want to talk about the car. I think it was June 10th. Eagle Rock, there's an attempted kidnapping of a young girl, and she gets away. She gives the car description. And the thing I was curious about was it was a city police officer, LAPD officer, that stops the car. But it sounded like that stop was independent of the report of the kidnapping. Or do you recall if that stop was as a result of this call about the kidnapping? Or Mark, what did you take from that?
No, as I recall, it was independent. It was a traffic stop. He had no information about the kidnapping, I believe.
Mark, you could appreciate this. He was a motor officer.
Yeah.
Motor officers are out there they're to enforce traffic, and they like riding greenies, and that's what they're getting paid to do. Mm-hmm. Richard ran a red light, and motor officer went after him, and had to go over a couple of little little hills, and on the on-ramp, he actually pulled him over. He went up, patted him down, put his hands on the hood of the car, and then went back to his motor to get his sight book. And while he's going back to his motor, Richard hears over his PA, be on the lookout for attempt kidnapping just occurred, and the vehicle description. Richard, with his finger, tells us he drew the pentagram right in the hood of the car.
Right.
And then just said, "Feet don't fail me now." The pentagram gave him the power, and he took off running. Now, depending on whose version you listen to or believe, Richard said, "The fat-ass cop never took a step in my direction." And the officer says he started to go after him. However, he was too big of a lead. He couldn't catch him. He just came back to his motor man for help. The vehicle was, in fact, a stolen vehicle. And they impounded the vehicle. They didn't order prints on it, although we had them up right on the hood of the radio car, on the hood of the stolen vehicle. Never did anything. They impounded it. And hot days, we found out about it. We wanted to get some, because they pulled out a little plastic cheapie, when they give you these things to put a business card in, or an appointment card when you go to a doctor, little plastic pieces of junk, but that's all it is. And so he left that in the car. And so the appointment card was to a dentist, a local dentist in Chinatown in downtown LA, to a Richard Bennett. And I apologize for that dog barking in the back. Not my dog.
It's all good.
And, so he left that in there. He left. We asked to go look at that card, get it printed. And it took us a couple of days before we got permission. The officer that we wanted to talk to, we found out we were there. He called in sick. And so we never did talk to him. And by the time we got to the car, LAPD got to it. Everything was lost. The prints were baked off. They really served to no purpose. But with that little envelope we did find to Richard Minnow, we believed that had possibilities. So we went ahead and put two of our plainclothes Asian officers inside the dental office. And that dental dentist, he was a working mamma jamma himself, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And so our guys were just making bank. It's all overtime. They got rich. And he didn't come back. I had a friend that was a dentist. And I got the x-rays from the other doctor, took them to him, and I said, "What can you tell me?" And he says, "This guy's got an abscess. He's going to have to go back. He's going to be in a lot of pain." And he was a cash paying customer. So we put the guys in there, and nothing was going on. At that time, the undersheriff made a decision and said, "Hey, that's LAPD's area. Go ahead and pull them out. Have them put in their silent alarm in there." And it goes directly to their headquarters. If it goes off, they'll get a card there right now. I said, "Okay." So we pulled our guys off, had LAPD put their alarm in there. And the first day the alarm went in, I get called that night, and it's the dentist, and he's all excited. He says, "How come we didn't go?" He kept pushing the button. Nobody ever came. Well, it was a malfunctioning alarm. Richard had gone down there that day. And so we let the executives know this had happened, and there was a meeting. Well, put him back in there then. Get the guys back in there. And he never did come back.
Right.
And I remember the sheriff said, "Well, whose brilliant idea was that to pull the guys out?"
Right.
And everybody just remained quiet. I'm not going to sit there and say, "It was your number two guy, boss."
Right. Yeah. And Gil, that was just a resource decision, huh? They didn't pay any overtime for two guys there.
Exactly.
And Gil, there's so much. Again, that's another pivotal point in this, and to me, in this whole story and whole investigation. Two things there. Well, three. The LAPD motor had no idea who he was stopping. The car was even stolen. Hadn't been registered, stolen at that point. I guess it did come back when he ran it. I take that back.
Yes.
But he didn't know when he was pulling the car over. Number two, this goes to an LAPD impound. Get been there, done that with LAPD. Been there, done that countless times. And they know the importance. I mean, based on what you're telling them, hey, we need to get this car processed ASAP. We need to get it processed ASAP. I'm a homicide detective. We need information. and that goes undone. I think you said a couple of days. I think it was longer than that based on what the documentary said, but whatever it wasn't done immediately. And we lost the fingerprints here because it got baked off in the sun. And this goes for everybody listening, how important it is for agencies to work together to, hey, respect the request of another agency. Sometimes you don't know the importance of something and let's get it done. I know resources are always an issue, but my God, sometimes the information speaks for itself. And the third part of this is that card, the business card to the dental office. And at the number, I mean, probably the thousands of cars that I've either impounded or stored over the years and doing an inventory, the number of things that anybody could overlook, but the attention to detail that was shown there on your part to actually, you know what, this might mean something here. Let's take a look at it. These are how crimes are solved, with that attention to detail. And people think it's all CSI. It all happens and, and we get it all solved in a day and blah, blah, blah. And this piece of evidence and that DNA nowadays doesn't work like that. It is the hard, tedious, otherwise overlooked piece of information that actually bring these things to a culmination. So I just wanted to touch on that. I thought that was one of the most important things that was brought out as far as the process into the investigation.
Well, thank you. I will tell you, when I first got there, the first speech I got when I got to Homicide Bureau, I thought they were just going to dump all over me because I was a rookie, new kid, hadn't paid my dues in Detective Bureau yet. They took me right out of the patrol station, right up to Homicide Bureau. And they said, you're going to solve cases up here. Don't think it's something you see on TV. There's the 3 S's to solving cases in homicide: scotch, snitches, shoe leather.
I like that one.
I never did acquire a taste for scotch.
Right.
To this day, I don't like scotch. But snitches and shoe leather is what it took back then. And it's still an awful lot. Now you can use a crime lab a lot more with modern technology and crime analysts that they have for the guys now. Of a lot of shoe leather. And you got to do stuff that did help us out.
Gil, I know in working narcotics, man, there obviously, and there was a lot of different agencies involved in this case, the Nightstalker case. Working in narcotics, there's cooperation. People work together every single day, but there's also a competitiveness. And did you see that at all? Was there a competitiveness maybe that played into this of another agency wanting to be the one to make the arrest or to solve the case? Or am I kind of over giving that too much of an importance?
No, it is very true. Now, let me say this to the world. The interaction between LAPD and the Sheriff's Department. We sat down with the investigators from LAPD, and Frank and myself, and we just said, okay, we don't care who solves a case. All we want is a good working relationship. And so that's what we had. I had never had such a great working relationship, become friends with guys from LAPD, RHD, Leroy Roscoe and Paul Tippett. We meet almost daily, and we had so much fun. It was working fun, but we had an awful lot of fun together, and we shared information back and forth. Any delays like the car and other stuff they wanted, it wasn't as a result of their lack of work. It was up at the higher level, just like it was in our department. Some of those guys are calling the shots.
By the way, I got to 100% agreed on that, Gil. 100% agreed on that.
Yeah, it was at the working level, as I refer to it, the working swine level. It was all good. It was a great relationship, and we're still friends today. Couple of the smaller agencies don't want Big Brother. They're competitive. We want to solve the case. We don't care who solves it. We just want the case solved. A couple of the smaller agencies, they wanted to solve it. We were Big Brother stepping in. And I can tell you, Monterey Park did that. Without mentioning names, their Detective Bureau lieutenant called us up with a tip. And they wanted to do a surveillance on somebody, and he explained why. And it was good work. And so we did it. And we ended up doing a search warrant. Gathered one that night and hit the house. It was the wrong house. It wasn't our guy, but it was good work went into it. Well, their chief found out that the informant to the sheriff's department was the DB lieutenant. The next day, the DB lieutenant was sent to graveyard working patrol. He was watch commander of patrol. They pulled him right out.
Wow.
And so it was very obvious they did not want us to solve their case. He wanted to solve it. And it was because of him. You know, you listen today to the news and you hear these blood-curdling 911 calls go out. Well, he wanted to release the blood-curdling 911 call of Mr. Doy on May the 14th. Every phone after May the 14th was cut, was disabled. So they forget, yeah, they're getting attention, but suspects following this case as well. Case in Glendale, in LA County, we have one coroner's office, Los Angeles County coroner. He's responsible for the overall investigation of all deaths in LA County. Well, Glendale is an incorporated city. They have their own investigators. They had a murder in Glendale. And when they were there, somebody mentioned, hey, do you think we ought to call the sheriff's department? This looks like it may be related to what they're working on. Their lead investigator said, no, it's definitely not. And so I get a phone call the next day from the coroner's investigator that was there. And he says, Gil, you better look into this case. You know, it looked like it's related because they go out to all of our cases. Right. So we go out there, we contact the lead investigator who had remembered Frank Salerno from the Hillside Strangler who had interaction with the Glendale Police Department. And the first thing he announced was, hey, this is not going to be like it was in the past. We're here. We're part of the team. No secrets. We're all hidden and yada, 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 yada. Well, he's already lying because he said, we had no idea that this may be related. Well, we had already been told that it had been said. We said nothing. He went on, and he loved the fact that we had the resources because we're a much larger department. So he calls in one day, and he wants a surveillance tape because he's got somebody that he thinks is suspect. And I said, okay, that's fine. Why do you think he's suspect? What kind of information do you have? Well, it's just his gut feeling he's got that he's a suspect. And I told him, you're going to have to come up with more than a gut feeling to get all these guys to go down there and start working a surveillance because you just feel it. Well, he got upset. And from that point on, wouldn't communicate with us, didn't have anything to give us. When the arrest is finally made, all the agents we had all their investigative work, their written product and evidence. We went to the DA. We had already had a DA assigned to the case for us. And so we filed everything at the same time. Glendale refused to give us their paperwork. He wanted to file it himself. And so the DA just said, let him, Gil. Just go ahead. Just let him bring it up himself. And he turned over a video. And on the video, you can hear him when they're asking him, should we notify the sheriff's department? He said, no, this had nothing to do with them. And so the smaller agencies, some of them did. Some people, Arcadia, they were great to work with on this case. Any of the other smaller agencies we had, they were more than cooperative. Just those two departments, they did create problems for us.
No, I've been there. I've been there. Gil, let's talk real quick about the media, and I want to get Mark's view on this too, because one of Mark's roles before chief was a public affairs officer. Am I right about that, Mark? In LA?
You were. Yeah, I was. You were. I was. Yeah, for
so
6 years in that role.
So, July '85, Laurel Erickson, NBC, local NBC reporter. Somehow, Gil, she finds out about the shoe print. Now, disclosing that information, I mean, that's how you're tying a lot of things together. You know that the Nightstalker, Richard, is watching these news reports because, just like you said right now, with the 911 calls, as soon as that was public, he cut the phone lines at these places. Right. So he's watching the news reports. He's getting intelligence. He's refining the way he commits his crimes. And she has information about the shoe print. What are you and Frank, I know you guys go to your boss, but what are you and Frank thinking when you learn about this?
We know where she got the footprint information from. The case that I told you previously, where did a search warrant. We followed the house, we followed the guy, did a search warrant at his house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we leave a copy of the search warrant with wherever we're at. Well, she got a hold of that copy. She saw that it'd be a footprint on there. So she calls up next day or 2 days later. She wants an interview. And Salerno, she's calling Salerno because he's got the name.
Mm-hmm.
And Salerno saying, we're not talking about this case. And she says, well, I know about the shoe print. And if you won't talk to me about the shoe print, I'll put the shoe print out. Mm-hmm. And he says, hold on. He called up the captain and he said, I got Laurel Erickson on the line. She's going to go with the shoe print. You got to talk her out of it. And so he gives her permission. He tells us, he comes out and he says, okay, you guys are under essentially house arrest. You cannot leave this office until she calls up and says she's in position. She came down, positioned herself in the parking lot of the Hall of Justice. Then she says, okay, I'm ready. She gets a grab shot as we're walking out. Then she can ask a quick question. And she gets what she wants. Gil was of the opinion, I'm saying, screw her. I want to hook her up.
Right.
I want to hook her up for interference. I wanted to hook her up for extortion. She's trying to extort us unless she's going to get this information out. I was not a Laurel Erickson fan. Mm-hmm. Having said that, and I've spoken with her, Paul Skolnick was her producer who went around all over the place. And Paul said she was never, and I believe him. And Laurel, since that time, and I have become good friends. But he says she never was going to release that information. She just used it. And getting to know Laurel, becoming friends, Laurel tells me, she was good at what she did. Sometimes she'd have to play dumb blonde. Sometimes she'd have to do everything to blow up the investigator's egos. Sometimes she'd just bat her eyebrows and put her finger right here, because she was a good-looking lady. And she just used every trick in the book to get her information. And I can remember when I called the wife up and I said, hey, how about taking the kids to the house? I got to go get some stuff. I got to leave town. She said, where are you going? I said, I'll explain everything. Just take the kids. I'd like to see them. And so she brought the kid. And I said, if you get there before me, just start packing me some underwear and stuff for 2-3 days. If I get home, she says, where are you going? I said, okay, I'm going to San Francisco. This is on a QT. Nobody knows where we're going. This is it. We got information. We're flying up there right now. And so when people ask you, where am I? Just tell them, you don't know. I took off and said I'd call you from wherever I'm at when I get there tonight. And she says, okay. So I leave. We go get on the plane and kiss my ass if Laurel Erickson isn't on the flight.
The same flight.
And she says, same flight. And my wife says, some hazy-gazi investigator you are. You said keep it a secret. Says about 4 that afternoon, Channel 4 puts out, LA homicide investigators headed to San Francisco, film at 11.
Whoa.
So she had already released it. We get up there. We packed all of our guns and luggage because you couldn't have a drink on a plane if you had your gun with you.
Right.
So we put them in the luggage. It's only a short trip. And we get them out. And it was I was charged with getting our equipment out. And she went up to Frank and said, hey, Frank, I'd like to talk to you about this. And he says, hey, sorry, we're in San Francisco. You want any information? Talk to San Francisco Police Department. And the next day, we went to the Doy residence. Henry Alfaro was there like a good cop. He was staked out. And he said, Gil, how about some information? I said, Ken, Henry, this is their case. We're just up here visiting. He says, I got it. And Laurel, she got there and she actually walked upstairs and knocked on the door. And San Francisco says, hey, she wants to talk to Frank. And I said, Frankie, she wants you. Get it. Go for it. He just says, tell her we can't talk. Get out of here. And so we then decided, what are we going to do? And I said, let's get back to LA. I said, he's not up here anymore. He's back down in LA. So we get on a plane, and in the seat right behind us, it's 4 seats, this plane. It's Frank and myself on one side, Leroy and Paul Tippin on the other side. And in comes Laurel Erickson in the seats right behind us. And Frank just asked her, how much did you have to pay for these seats? And she said, no, we just bought tickets and here they are.
Right.
I said, okay, well, don't ask us any questions about the case because we're not going to talk about it. She said, no. She says, hey, least we can do is buy you a drink, though. Would you allow us to buy you a drink? And so Gil said, well, why not?
Right.
So they came back and they took our drink order. And I said, matter of fact, fellas, we better order 2 apiece. It's a short flight. So we got 2 drinks apiece. And Laurel Erickson, she says, hey, guys, okay, you got your drinks. We're not going to ask you at port, but what was the main purpose for you coming to San Francisco? And Paul Tippin looked at her and said, Laurel, isn't that the same dress and the same shoes you were wearing on the way up here yesterday? And she says, okay, I get it. No more questions. That was it.
Man.
He didn't have enough time to take clothes or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Gil, one thing you mentioned it, I think twice now, when your wife Pearl made the decision, or you and Pearl made the decision that she was going to leave the house with the kids. Talk about the impact that decision had on you and why you guys made that decision.
It was not a we that made the decision.
Okay.
That was a her made the decision.
Okay.
Trust me. Because that was 4:30 in the morning, August 8th. I get called that he's hitting Diamond Bar. The place he's hit is probably about a full 5-minute drive from my house to there, close to the house. The wife says, where are you going this time? I said, I got to go to Diamond Bar. She says, Gil, that's nothing to mess around with. I said, I'm not messing around. I went in and took care of business in the restroom, the shower, the shave, and come on. She says, Gil, I'm asking you, where are you going? And back in those days, we used Thomas guides. We didn't have this navigation assistance. So I said, look there's the Thomas guide. Here's the address I've written down. That's where it's at. And I said, hey, now that you're wide awake, though, listen, not now. Go back to bed, get some sleep. But when you wake up, I said, how about going to the market, buy a bunch of food? I said, maybe about 2, 3 this afternoon, I'll bring 15, 20 people down here. We'll have lunch. Just cold sandwiches, chips and stuff. And my wife, who I affectionately call Sister Mary Clarence, she's the religious one in the family. And I'm the foul-mouthed devil. And she just looked at me. She says, bullshit. She says, I'm not going back to bed, and you're not leaving until we're out of here.
Wow.
And my 13-year-old daughter picked her head around because she heard us talking. She says, Mom, you want me to wake up brother and sister? She says, yes, get them up. They don't have to change. Just get them up. Tell them we're leaving. She went and she put clothes inside bags. She didn't even get the suitcases. Just threw them. She's like a bag lady. Just threw them in there. And she got in her car and says, we're not coming home till this thing's over. And she left.
Wow.
And I left. I didn't have time to worry about she's gone. Actually, I felt better because she was going to be with somebody all the time. She wasn't going to be alone. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I didn't have time. My captain, which was against federal law, you'd appreciate that, having been out here in L.A., FSLA had just started. Mm-hmm. And he's quoted in the Times as saying these guys are working 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
And we damn sure weren't getting paid for it. So we were getting paid for some, but I had nowhere near what we were putting in. And when they showed the documentary, we watched it. I told them when we started this project, they said, this is the way I want it to go. And I said, I don't care how you want it to go. It's you guys are pros. I'm just the talking head. And they said, okay, we struck a deal. And they said, okay, when we get it all shot, then we'll call you in so we can go through the editing together. I said, I don't need to be there for editing. You're the pros. I'll just watch it when it drops. The wife and I watched it when it dropped. We binge watched it. Mm-hmm. And my wife, as soon as it was over, I apologized to her and asked her for forgiveness because I had factored in it was her job to take care of the kids in the house. Mm-hmm. It was my job to catch the killer. I forgot all about the fear factor. And I didn't realize how frightening it was for her since I was never around. And I didn't have time to think about that stuff. And I felt bad.
Mark, living in LA at that time, Did you feel the fear of that back at that time, or were you just a young, carefree college freshman or whatever you were?
No, remember, I'm quite a bit older than you, Bill, and better looking. But I was 24 years old.
Wow.
I'm sorry, 24. I was 22 in '85, and we lived in Alhambra, Gil. I think, Bill, you knew that. So I grew up in Alhambra. So all these cities, Pico Rivera, Montebello, and in Monrovia. I mean, these are cities whose high school teams I had played when I was in high school. I mean, very, very familiar with all these cities. So these news reports that are breaking, and at the time, there's all kinds of information all over the place, evolving every day about it. And at one point, I remember them talking about, a lot of these homes were near freeways. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not, just by chance. But we lived 3 blocks from the 10 freeway, from Interstate 10, and I thought, you know what, this guy is not going to get me and my family. I was still living at home at the time. I was just out of college, and I was waiting tables with my college degree. And I said, this guy's not going to get my family, not going to get my parents, not going to get my siblings. And so, like the cowboy that I was, I actually got my Colt 45 and I opened my bedroom window, which is right next to a flower bed, and I put up in the most precarious way this old lamp on a couple of books that if you breathed on it was going to fall over right next to the window. And I said, if this guy comes in this window in this house, he is going to have his brains blown out. And I waited. So, and there was fear because, in other words, he didn't know. And I was living right in the epicenter, Glendale on one side, Monrovia, Sierra Madre, Monterey Park, right there. And I thought the chances are as good for him to hit this house than the other house. So there was a lot of that going on, but I was confident that he was not going to come through my window. Let me make sure everything else was locked at night. That was the only way to come in. My parents knew what I was doing too. I said, don't worry, Mom and Dad. If he comes in here, he's not going to get us. So there was a lot of fear. There's a lot of, obviously, with my neighbors. My girlfriend at the time lived 2 blocks away. So I told them, hey, keep everything locked. They didn't have firearms in the house. So we did everything we could. But again, as far as being a regular citizen there, about 5 years before I went to CHP Academy, we were right in the epicenter of it. And these were pretty scary times, no doubt.
Yeah. Hey, Gil, about this time, I think it's pretty clear that you were right. Let me put it that way. It's pretty clear that all these things are connected. There was the case in, I think, Sun Valley, July 20th, where there was a sexual assault of a young boy. There was a male shot in the head. A woman was raped. So it kind of tied everything together, and there was a shoe print. So when your original theory of the serial nature of this kind of played out, what happened with resources for the case? Was it like all a head full now at this point?
It became right after Frank announced to the captain on July the 6th, on July the 5th, that this was in fact a serial case. Then resources started opening up. As we went forward a little further, just within days, we could get anything we wanted. Okay. They were giving us bodies. They were whatever we wanted.
Let's talk real quick we talked about San Francisco, but one thing that struck me and was the Diane Feinstein press conference, right? The amount of detail that she got into about the gun, about the connection to, I think her quote was, 12 murders in LA, and about the shoe print. Mark, from your public affairs standpoint, is there any reason to give out that kind of detail? I think about the freeway shootings, the serial freeway shootings in the Los Angeles area that you handled. Is there any reason for a political figure to give out that type of investigative detail? How is there an argument that serves the public?
Yeah, it's really hard to describe why she would do such a thing. You said political figure. The only thing I can think about is politics. It's about attention. And because, and you have to remember, this is not just the mayor. We have to assume that she's surrounded by staff members. She has to have a chief of staff. She has to have advisors. There are lawyers on the team. There are people that she has to be interacting with, unless she just decides to sequester herself. I'm going to make this decision all by myself. There have to be a number of people giving her advice about the repercussions of releasing such information. And not to mention law enforcement. She has to be talking to law enforcement about the impact this could have in a negative way. And anybody with two brain cells to slap together should be able to realize that if you divulge these specific pieces of evidence that people like Gil and other law enforcement officials have gathered over time, that this guy is he's going to put flip-flops on. He's going to change shoes if he knows that they've identified the type of shoe that he's wearing.
Right.
It is mind-boggling to me. And this has happened before. Obviously, it'll happen again, unfortunately. But this goes back to, I wanted to talk about Laurel Erickson a little bit because, again, I mean, I knew her, in other words, as a viewer like everybody else. I did not know her in the professional sense when I was in the job. But when Gil, you said that you found out, you talked to her and talked to some, I think her producer maybe said, hey, Laurel was never going to release that information about the shoe print. She was never going to do it. And I believe that from my experience with numerous law enforcement agencies, all the way from a field reporter all the way up to the highest level of gatekeepers, producers, editors, things like this. For the most part, law enforcement, the media do not want to harm a law enforcement investigation. For the most part, there are always exceptions, but for the most part, all they're going to do to themselves is harm in the long run, because you will never trust them again. You will never trust them again. You won't give them anything. The thing is, people have to realize there's a very, very important relationship between law enforcement and the media, because sometimes law enforcement can work with media to solve crimes. They can put information out. We're getting a picture out and out of these social media, things like this. It's a great tool, a great conduit to disseminate information. And most of these crimes, a lot of these crimes are solved, not strictly, but at least initially, on witness information, guiding law enforcement to another clue or to another witness and eventually to a perpetrator. So normally law enforcement media work together very, very well, normally. And I think Laurel Erickson was just going to press the issue. She wanted to get some information out there. She wanted to get a scoop on one piece that was not going to harm the investigation if she's successful. So, but Diane Feinstein, this one is, again, it is beyond my comprehension that anybody would do anything this malicious and, quite frankly, this stupid. And I've never been able to figure out why she would do such a thing.
So, Gil, how frustrated were you with this?
When that excuse me, when that came out, I'm about to go kill some dogs.
We'll fix it later on. We're all good.
Honestly, I've never heard this kind of accident. I'm just wondering if they've got something trapped back in their backyard. Not a human, but another animal or something. Because I never hear them going out like this. Anyway, needless to say, I was beside myself. We just flown in from San Francisco. We walked into the Hall of Justice. Our media section was right there on the first floor. We walked in. As we're walking in, they said, "Hey guys, come in here. Come and look at this." And it was Feinstein giving her briefing, her press conference. I was livid. We went up to the 8th floor, which is where our office was. Sat down, and finally I just told Frank, I said, screw this. Let's get out of here. Let's go have a drink. May as well go fishing. And so we went down to the local, right there in Chinatown, a little place called Amy Lou's. We went into Amy's, and the captain was there, and we had a drink. And we're telling the captain, goddamn, you got to do something. You got to get to the sheriff. The sheriff has got to do something to stop them from talking. And so he left, and he called us up about a half hour later and said, okay, stop drinking, get something to eat, and be back up here in the office at 7:00. The sheriff, who was down in Antelope Valley at some kind of festival out there, they flew him back down. He called for a press conference, and he had a press conference and said, essentially politicians stop. You've just released information that's very detrimental to us in the case, and so it's got to stop. And he told them, then he wanted to talk to us back down in his office. And he said, well, how did I do? He said, let me tell you that I let them know if she opens her trap again, we're going to embarrass her publicly. And so there was nothing that could be done. He said, how do you guys feel? And I just responded. I said, you took two tired, weary homicide investigators. We're down and out over listening and watching what she said. We just put a smile on our faces. We're ready to go back to work tomorrow morning. And so we left. And his aide was a captain who used to be Frank's old partner in Homicide. And in internal affairs before he got to Homicide, he said the sheriff was so stoked. He still likes to be talking to real cops. Right. You guys are real cops. And he's so stoked that he made you happy and everything went well. Bob Morneau. Bob Morneau says you got to have understanding to do this job. And understanding is different from condoning. If you understand why people do what they do or why they committed a particular crime, when you get in front of them, it makes it much easier for you to talk to them without any barriers. Well, I understand why she did it. And you hit on it, Mark, when you said they would follow up on each one of the clues. Every one of them was followed up on until his arrest. And what we did, which I thought never gets any mention, I thought it was a brilliant idea. It certainly wasn't my idea. But they called back everybody that took the time to call in to say thank you. Wow. After it was done, to go ahead and make sure maybe they'd get involved again next. She was a politician. We found that a lot of people just like to drop any kind of tidbit of information to make the public or their friends or whoever's listening to them, whether it's another cop, they're part of this case. Mm-hmm. This is a big, big case. So she wants everybody to know she's on top of it. She knows what's going on. She was an idiot. She was foolish. She didn't understand the harm that it was going to cause, the public in general. And so she released it. As a result of her release, Richard said he dumped the shoes and a gun over the Golden Gate Bridge. And so certainly it was, I was at a loss. I never did say anything nice about her until her ultimately demise, but it was just gone. I had to get rid of it and just keep moving on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's...
I can't imagine the frustration. I just can't imagine the frustration. And again, like you said, you called her an idiot. And, again, God rest her soul. We're not here to bash on her, but looking back historically and from an investigative point of view, it really is mind-boggling how someone in that position can be that stupid to do such a thing. And I'm frustrated for you, 40 years later.
Yeah. Gil, he then goes down and strikes in Orange County. And the fascinating thing about that Mission Viejo case, I thought was the witness, the young kid who was out in the street and he got a partial plate on a suspicious car, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. And that car ended up being recovered. You get a print off the window, off the mirror, the rear view mirror. But what was there no like AFIS back then or no automated print system back then?
AFIS at that time, I don't know what they called it, but it was only good for felony convictions. So if you hadn't had a felony conviction, you had to manually search them.
And Gil, just talk real quick about, I know you guys must have had a tip line at this time. How do you deal, or how did the people staffing that deal with that volume and make sure that stuff that needed to be followed up on was followed up on and kind of the garbage was sloughed off to the side?
We had a guy named Detective Louis Dano, Louis the Hat. And Louis was well aware of the case. He's one of the guys that sat with my partner, with Don Garcia, the guy that broke me in, and myself in my motorhome listening to the surveillance work that was going on. So Louis had worked on the Hillside Strangler, and he was well aware. Back then, they used to keep cards. It was on 3x5 index cards. Every clue that came in they were categorizing them on 3x5s. Well, now we have computers these days. So he was put in charge of that clue list, and we had a team of people that worked the phones. And every time it went out on the news, the phone lines would light up like a Christmas tree. And they were logging every clue that came in. They'd fill out a clue sheet, and they'd turn them over to Louis. Louis would make sure everything got in, put it in the computer, and then he would hand out clues to every two-man team that was working them. And every two-man team included a homicide investigator and a guy that was an investigator, but not from homicide. He was from our Metropolitan Bureau.
Right. Interesting.
That was a great policy. That was great.
Yeah. I don't know whose call it was. It wasn't mine, but somebody came up with it was a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gil, San Francisco gets a lead on who the guy is, right? On who the Hillside Strangler is. You guys identify him from the print you have. You know who he is. The decision to go public with that information or not go public with that. What was your position on that, and what was the thought process behind that?
I was a swine investigator.
Mm-hmm.
The captain called Frank and myself in, and he said, "Hey, I just got called downstairs. Daryl Gates, Brad Gates, who was the sheriff of Orange County, Sheriff Block, and I believe the chief of police was McCarthy, I don't know, from San Francisco. They're heading down to my office, and we're going to do a conference call with the chief of police from San Francisco. And purpose of the meeting is to decide. We've just identified the berries positively. Do we go public with it tonight, or do we hold on to it?" And the captain said, what's your take on it? And we both said, we'd like 24 hours. We believe we'll have with it 24 hours. And the week before, when he hit Mission Viejo, we told the captain, and at that time, we had no idea who we were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew we were getting close, and we told him we'll have him in 2 weeks. So now, a week later, we're saying, give us 24 hours. Captain went down and came back up and said, we lose. They're going with it tonight. And we understood why. Yeah, the implications, if he hits tonight and we knew who it was and it didn't go, it got out, then we'd be hammered because we didn't release the information. And politically, that would be suicide. And I wholeheartedly understand it. From an investigative standpoint, I tried to put everything in our favor. It didn't work out. And hindsight is 20/20 because he gets arrested by being identified from the picture in the newspaper.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to talk about that a bit as we close it out, August 31st, LAPD. You guys have an LAPD team. They're kind of famous or infamous SIS guys working the Greyhound bus terminal. You all are thinking that he's going to be leaving town, right? He's going to see the news reports and leave town.
Well, we didn't know if he was going to leave town. We knew that was from the informant. That's where he liked to hang out at. He liked to hang out around there. That's where all the thugs and the lowlifes would hang. He'd be around that Greyhound. That was like central home for him. It was the place that it was at that time. And he did tell us, the informant told us, but he'll recognize the cops right away. Because you cops can look dirty, but you don't smell dirty. Your hair is clean. Your teeth aren't rotten. He'll make you right away. I don't care what you dress as. And we didn't expect him to be coming in on a bus from Arizona. And that's what he did. He came in from Arizona. So he comes in through the parking lot, through the back door, coming into and as soon as he got in there, he saw the lobby and he said, nah, something ain't right. He went back out that way. So they were never looking that way. He made it away from there, made it to went to a liquor store, saw his picture, got on the bus right away. If he'd have made it 8 miles, you'd understand this. He was just right into East LA, right around Eastern, and matter of fact, just past Downey Road in Olympic. Yeah. There was a street called Brannick, and he had a brother living there. That's all he was trying to do was make it to his brother's house. He got as far as Olympic and Soto, which is maybe 2 miles from downtown LA, and he saw a passenger on the bus, give him a double take, closes the paper, hit the buzzer, because they were at a red light, got off, there was a phone booth right there. Saw him going to the phone booth. He knew he was calling the cops. He went down. Next major intersection was Lorena. He got off at Lorena. And the passenger that had identified him went ahead and flagged down a guy from the gas company in the gas company truck and said, follow the bus. Killer's in there. They followed. Richard got off the bus, saw the guys coming. He started his running trek, ran right through the Estrada Courts, which is an extremely violent housing project area at the time. And he went through the projects, went across over fences through housing, over the sound walls of the 5 freeway, cut across the 5 freeway, all lanes, made it to the other side. He's running in the northeasterly direction. By this time, 911 calls are going into LAPD because that's LAPD's area. He makes it once again across that dividing line. Now he's in the county.
Right.
He tried to carjack 2 different cars. First one, he wrecked into the wall, didn't get away. Second one, he's carjacking a female. She screams. Her husband, and at that time in East LA, 2 kinds of, I can call them Mexicans, 2 kinds of Mexicans in East LA, good ones and bad ones. The bad ones all had guns. The good ones all had a bat, a pipe, or a 2x4 right by the door for protection.
Right.
And she went ahead. She screamed. Husband came out, hit him in the head with a pipe, piece of metal. And the neighbors heard the screaming, saw the fight going on. Richard dropped everything, started running away. He only got about 3 or 4 houses down. And then he quit. I mean, the guy's exhausted.
Right.
He's running for 2 miles, jumping fences, gets in a fight, gets hit in the head. He just quit. They had circled him. Initially, the citizens didn't know who they had. And there's some little kid that kept saying, it's him, it's him, it's him. And they kept pushing him back. Get this kid back. You're going to get hurt. Get back. And then the first deputy that got there, who happened to have the same last name as Richard, got there. He's probably the only cop in Los Angeles County that didn't have a picture of Richard in a radio car. And he didn't know who he had it initially.
Right.
He just knew he's a rookie and he's got a give me call. It's citizens holding a felony suspect. So all he's got to do is go handcuff him and then write a story that they're going to give him. And he called for paramedics, put a turban on his head, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And Gil, I know you talked to him, interviewed him many times since that day he was arrested. Just quick takeaways from interviewing him, from talking to him.
He had, he was probably one of the most articulate killers I've ever spoken with. He was more articulate, smarter than the average killer. I'm telling you, this guy was well-read, taught himself. In his own words, quote unquote, I've got an ego that'll fill this room, and I can tell you all about serial killers from the time the Romans fed the Christians to the lions to the modern day serial killer. He called Frank Salerno, he called him Mr. Salerno because he knew that Salerno had worked on the Hillside Strangler. And he called me Gil because I was just Gil.
Right.
And I called him Rich. We got along, and I got along with him better than anybody because of the cultural background. And that was it. It was not that he was my friend, not that I loved the guy, but I had a job. I've spoken all over the U.S. and young people, especially college kids, weren't you afraid going in there because weren't you nervous? You knew he was in the devil worship. He was a serial killer. Weren't you nervous? And absolutely not. And the analogy I use is a quarterback, Peyton Manning. He goes out with his buddies after practice. He has brothers. He has family. He's a father. He's a dad. He's a boyfriend. He's everything there is. But come Sunday, he puts on that helmet and everything's out the door. Doors are locked. Now he's focused. It's game time. Well, the first time I went in with him, everything's thrown out the door. Doors are locked. It's game day. I got to be a professional. I have one goal in mind, and that's to get him to talk any way I can.
Mm-hmm.
Legally, any way I can. Right. And so that's what I did, and that's how it went.
Fascinating.
And I'm glad it worked out.
Gil, final question from me. Where did the nickname El Cucuy come from?
It's funny you say that because I just ran into a gal Thursday night. This lady, Rosie Arias, her husband, now deceased, was a very dear friend of mine. And he was a patrol cop at one time. He got transferred out. He was working a surveillance investigative unit. And then a few years later, he came back as a sergeant. But he had been out of patrol so long, he asked if he could not put on his stripes until after he went through a little indoctrination there in patrol again. So he came out there, got a prowling call around his apartment building. And so I told my partner, I said, watch this. And I stood on the other side of the apartment building. We went to back him up. And as he came around, I was behind some bushes. I jumped out and I grabbed his hands because I knew he'd go for his gun. So I jumped out, I screamed, I grabbed his hands right away and screamed. And he screamed. And then he realized what was. He's, oh my God. And he said, I thought it was the Cucuy that come to get me, the boogeyman. He started calling me that. And before you know it, even the gangsters, even the gang members were calling me the Cucuy.
Right.
And hey, better be careful. The Cucuy's going to get you.
Right.
So it stuck with me. There's still some of the old guys still call me the Cucuy.
Gil, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. What are you doing with yourself now? Is there a book? Is there, besides the let me talk about the documentary. It's a 4-part documentary on Netflix called The Nightstalker. I think it's really well done.
Yes.
It's a fascinating story. What else are you doing now besides the river and enjoying yourself? And
well, we just finished doing. I just got done shooting a documentary for Channel 4. It'll be on NBC. It'll either come out the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And that's just a 1-hour documentary on the Nightstalker. And that's a non-scripted documentary. I just got done. I got done shooting a movie, an independent film. I got contacted by the director and asked if I'd make a cameo appearance on this. You know, it was loosely connected to the Nightstalker, and he didn't say how loosely it was. So he talked to me a little bit about it. I said, okay, I'll make a cameo appearance on it for you. So they sent me this location sheet, and there's talking parts in it. And I called him out. I said, hey, wait a minute. You know, you asked me for a cameo. You got enough talking part. By the time I'm done with this, I'll end up on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Yeah. And he laughed. And he says, you never know. You just might. And he says, you can do this. I said, I'm not an actor. He said, no. He says, you think about it, Gil. Every time you went into that interview room with a suspect, you're an actor. And I said, okay, let's do this. So I go down there, and I'm nervous as a whore in church because I've never had to stand in front of cameras and talk to the news media, not a problem. To stand in front of anybody, and you know, I've had thousands in front of me when I'm speaking. Doesn't bother me. But now I've got to have speaking parts, and now they're filming it, and there's another actor in front of me, and I'm a little bit nervous. So they actually put cue cards behind the cameras, so in case I forgot my lines, I'd have them there. So I did it. And the movie is basically, it's all Hispanic. It's gang members versus lowriders. And so that's the premise of the movie. Throughout the movie, one of the characters is the pastor, and the pastor and my character are old homeboys. They grew up together. Just one ended up being good, going to the church. The other guy just ended up being a regular everyday citizen. And they play checkers and chess and games together. And they're talking, and in their talking, they bring up, the pastor says, hey, look, see that Nightstalker guy hit again. Shows them the newspaper. And then you see on the news media, you know, news article just flashes. So you got the Nightstalker in there. The movie goes on. I don't know what the rest of it does in between there. But then in the end, Richard was caught on the streets of East LA on Hubbard Street. So the name of the movie is Hubbard Street. And I will tell you this, not to be not for a spoiler alert, but I'm so excited to do this. First off, after the first day of shooting, I realized it's not that difficult. And plus, it took me back to my days when I was a teenager, talking like the way Mexicans and gang members would talk. And that came very easy to me. And so they stopped writing script for me, and they just said, here's the setup. You do it.
Right.
And so I was just making up my own dialogue as I went along. And they were excited. They were happy with it. And the end of the movie, when he gets arrested on Hubbard Street, when he gets captured, they have, you know, when you see a movie and you hear the thought that's going, the thought process. And I'm looking up and I see a picture on his mug on a telephone pole. Be on the lookout. Here's the wanted guy. And I'm looking at it, and my mind is saying, I wonder where that son of a bitch is at. You know, God, let him come around. And all of a sudden I look up and I see gang members chasing. I said, here he comes. That's it. And so I put a bag of groceries that I have down. I found a 2x4. And as he comes running by me, I get to whack him and whack him right in the gut. He goes down, and then I whack him again on the back. And by this time, the gang members get on him and they're putting the boots to him. And, you know, in case anybody's worried, nobody got hurt by the whack. It was a rubber bat.
Right.
I mean, it was a rubber 2x4. It wasn't real. And I got this, and it was poetic justice because I never got to hit him. I never got to say anything bad. But once he went down, I'm standing over him, and they got me saying in my best vernacular, "What now, puto?"
That's awesome.
So we did that, and I'm working. They're writing right now. I've been working with a guy. All paperwork has been signed, and I'm on a dole. They're shooting for a 8-part scripted series for. I want to say it's going to be Peacock, I think. And so I met with them. I looked at. They're working on right now the second rewrite for the pilot. And the way it works is once that pilot, they figure one more rewrite and it'll be ready to go. And once that pilot's done, before they actually start filming it, they'll ask the writer, give me 3 more episodes right now. So they have 3 in the can, 1 ready to go. Then they start filming.
Got it.
And so right now we're into it for the writing part of it. And once it goes, then it'll jump up to a new level for me. I'll be, I won't be in it. That'll be all actors. I'll be a consultant technical advisor, probably join in on the writing tape.
Awesome. Gil,
So
thank you for your service to the Sheriff's Department. Thank you for your service specifically to the Homicide Bureau. I know, like I said, that you made an impact there, not only in the big cases, but as the chief said, the legacy, right? The mentorship for the people that came after you, that looked up to you, sharing your expertise and your knowledge. Man, that's so big in law enforcement and so necessary to keep our profession going. Thank you for your time today. It's been an awesome conversation, and can't wait to see you on the screen, Chief.
hey, thank you. It was an honor to do this, and I can't thank you guys enough for keeping everything going and keeping it straight.
Gil, it was a pleasure and honor, and I mean that sincerely. And thank you for your service, like Bill said.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.